In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to add magic or spell cards to your card game. I'm going to be working off my own card game tutorial series project, but this method of adding the magic cards can be integrated into any project you may be working on. The basics of this system is that each magic card ability will have its own script with a trigger function, and that trigger function will be called when the card is placed on the field. So to get started, we're going to open up our card database script, and we're going to add a new type of card into our cards database. I'm going to call this new card Tornado, and then for the attack and health I'm going to put null, and for the card type I'm going to put magic. The next thing to do is import an asset for this card, or an image, and I have a PNG that I've prepared, so I'm just going to drag this into my file system. Then we're going to right click on it, rename, and we're going to rename it to Tornado Card, and the Tornado part we want to line it up exactly with what we have here in the card database, because it's going to use that part of the name to look for the asset, the way we have the code set up. Then I'm going to go into the player's deck script, and in the player deck array I'm going to add Tornado as one of the cards. And then if we give this a run, you can see that it's importing the image correctly as a card, but the attack and health are set to null, and that's looking a bit weird. It's an easy fix though, because we just have to disable the health and attack rich text label nodes if it is a magic card. So we'll come down here in this deck script to where we instantiate the cards, and we'll check if the card's type is monster, and make sure that if condition comes after this line where we actually assign the card's type. Then we can check if new card.card type equals monster, and if it is, we'll indent these 4 lines of code here that set the card's attack and health and update the attack and health nodes, and then we'll add an else condition, so if the card is a magic card. Then we want to update the card's ability text, but the card doesn't have anywhere to put ability text yet, it doesn't have a node, so we'll go to open the card scene, and in here we'll right click on the root card node, and we'll add a new child, and we will add a rich text label, and then we're going to rename this to ability. Then in the inspector, I'm going to change the size and position of this new text box, and I'll also put in some default text in the text property, and I'm also going to search for modulate and set the modulate to black. Then back over in the deck script, we can now get a reference to this node using newCard.getNode ability, and if it's a monster card, we'll set ability.visible equal to false, and then in the else, so if it's a magic card, we'll set the attack and the health nodes visible equal to false, and then we'll get a reference to the ability, and we'll say ability.text equals, and now we want to draw this text from the card database, so we'll go over to the card database script, and we're going to be adding a new attribute into this card's database called ability text, and for the first 3 monster cards we already have in here, we'll put it to null, but then for our tornado card, I'm going to set it to a string that says deal 1 damage to all opponent cards. Then we'll go back to the deck script, and we're already accessing values from the database up here, so I'm just going to copy this line, and I'm going to set the text equal to this, and I'll change the 1 to a 3 since we want to get the 4th element, and it's array, so it's always -1. And if we give this a run, you can see that the text is loading onto the card perfectly, and also we can't play the card in the top row of card slots because they're monster slots, but we can play it in the bottom row, which is really cool. And that's happening because all of these nodes in the top row have the monster card slot script attached, and you can see in that script that the card slot type is monster, and then for the 5 card slots on the bottom row, we have the magic card slot script attached, and you can see if we open that script that the card slot type is magic. And in the card manager, in the finish drag function where we release a card, you can see we're checking if the card slot type is the same as the card type, and only then are we placing the card in a card slot. And you can see here, if we give this another run and we place the magic card in a card slot, you can see that we're getting a weird hover effect, so let's fix that. So we'll just scroll down in our card manager script to the highlight card function, and in here we want to check if a card is not in a card slot. So we'll do an if statement and we'll check if a card's in a card slot, and if it is, we'll return, so we won't run any of the rest of the code in this function. We'll give this a run now just to verify that that worked and it looks good, but if you can see, if we click on the card, it performs an attack, and we don't want our magic cards to be able to attack. So in the card manager script, we're going to scroll up here to the card clicked function, and we're going to be reformatting this a little bit. For our condition in here where we're checking if it's not the enemy's turn, I'm going to change this to check if it is the enemy's turn, and if it is, we're going to return, so we won't run any of the code in the rest of this function. Then below that, where we're checking if the player is not attacking, we're going to instead check if the player is attacking, and if they are, we'll return. And then below that, we're checking if the card is not in the player cards that attacked this turn array. We're going to change that to check if it is in the array, and if it is, we'll return. Then make sure these lines afterwards are indented back correctly. And then in this if condition where we're checking if opponent cards on battlefield.size is equal to 0, we'll remove the return from in there. Then, before that if statement, check in if there's cards in the opponent's battlefield. We're going to add a new if statement, and we're going to check if card type is not equal to monster, and if that's true, then we're just going to return. If we give this a test now, you can see that we can no longer attack by clicking our magic card, which is good. But if we end our turn, you can see that the enemy attacks our card. And that's because when we place the magic card in the card slot, it's being added to the player cards on battlefield array. And when the enemy attacks, it chooses a card from that array to attack. So we're going to go to our finish drag function in the card manager and we're going to make some changes. After we check if the card type is the same as the card slot, we're going to add a new if condition to check if the card type is monster, and I'm also going to combine the below if statement onto the same line using a double ampersand, and if those conditions are met, we're going to take these two lines down here from the bottom of the function and paste them up here, and after that we'll return, and then we're going to take all this code here and we're going to indent it back one since we don't want it to be in the if condition, and here where we have card, that's supposed to be card being dragged, which is the card we've just put in the slot. And then down here, after all this code, but before the return, we're going to do another if statement to check if card being dragged dot card type is equal to monster. And if it is, we're going to cut this line here where we're adding the card into the player cards on battlefield array. And we'll also cut this line and put it in here saying played monster this turn equals to true. And then we'll add an else down here, and this is if we played a magic card, so we'll just print magic card played. And we'll take this card being dragged equals to null, and we'll set that just before we return. Now we can give this a run to see if this works. And it looks like we're not able to put monster cards in the monster card slot, and that is because we have an exclamation mark up here where we have player monster card this turn. So if we get rid of that, because we want to check if the card is monster and we have played a card already, then we can't place a card. So now you can see that we can place one card, monster card in the slot, but not a second, and we still can place magic cards. So that's perfect. And you can see it printed magic card played when we played that magic card, and the next thing we want to do is actually trigger that card's ability. But that card's ability hasn't been defined yet, so we're going to go down into the file system, we're going to right click on the scripts folder and I'll make a new folder called abilities, and then I'll right click on the abilities folder and I'll create a new script, and I'm going to call this tornado. And we'll open this script up, and in here we'll add a new function called trigger ability, and in this function we'll just print ability triggered so we can test if it works. Now currently a card doesn't have a way of keeping track of what ability it has or anything, so let's open the card script. And we'll add a new variable called ability script, and then we'll open the card database and we're going to add a new attribute in here called ability script, and for the 3 monster cards we have we'll set it to null, but for our tornado card I'm going to come down into the file system and right click on our tornado script, then I'm going to press copy path, then I'm going to paste it up here for the tornado's ability script, and I'll surround it with quotes. And now when we instantiate a card we have to set that ability script, so we'll open up the deck script and we'll go down to where we instantiate cards. And if it is a magic card, we'll create a new variable called new card ability script path, and we'll set it equal to, and then we'll get this database reference up here and we'll swap out that 1 with a 4 since it's the 5th element that we're trying to get from the card database, and the attributes start at 0, so it's 0, 1, 2, 3, and then this one is the 4th. Then we'll do an if check and we'll check new card ability script path just to make sure that a variable assigned correctly, and if it did we'll set new card dot ability script, which is that variable we just created in the card script, and we'll set it equal to, and then we'll use the load function, and then we'll put the path in here, and then dot new at the end with open close off brackets, because we want to instantiate this script. Now, over in the card manager where we're printing magic card played, we'll instead do card being dragged dot ability script, and then we'll call the trigger ability function that we created. And now if we give this a run and drop a magic card in a slot, you can see in our output we are getting printed ability triggered, which is amazing. One thing to note is that when we instantiated the ability script, we didn't add it of a child of anything, so it's not part of the hierarchy or the scene tree, which is all these nodes here. And that just means that these functions that came with the script, such as ready or process or any other inbuilt ones like that, won't work unless you add it as a child of something. But functions we create and call ourselves, like trigger ability, are fine. So I can get rid of the process and ready functions in here since they're not going to work anyway. And now we can call this function, and calling the ability and all that works. The only thing left to do is to define what this ability actually does within this function. And for my example, I just want to deal 1 damage to each opponent card. And we already have an array in the battle manager that stores all the opponent cards on the field, so I can just loop through all these cards by doing for card in and the name of the array. And in the battle manager, I already have the code to deal damage to cards, so I'm going to take those lines, copy them and paste them into the tornado script. And then in here, of course, defending card doesn't exist. We're going to swap that out with card. And for how much health the card loses, we're going to create a new constant up at the top called tornado damage and set it equal to 1. And then down here where we're minusing the card health, we'll minus that constant name. And then change those last 2 defending card references to just card. And now because this script isn't actually a child of anything, it doesn't exist in this scene, when we're getting our battle manager reference so we can get access to that opponent cards on battlefield array, we won't just be able to drag it in like we usually do. You can see if I try and press play and we try and place a magic card, it just errors out. And that's because it doesn't exist in the main scene, so it's not going to be able to find its way to any of these nodes. So the way we're going to get access to it is we're going to pass a battle manager reference in to the trigger ability script. So where we're calling trigger ability in the card manager, we're going to pass in battle manager, and we can just drag that reference into here because card manager is in the scene tree. And then the tornado script will take that reference in as battle manager reference, and then for card in battle manager reference dot opponent cards on battlefield. And if we run that now and end our turn so the opponent plays a card, then if we play our magic card, you can see that the opponent card goes from 3 health to 2 health, which is perfect. And now we have to handle if that enemy card's health reaches 0. You can see if I give myself 3 tornadoes and play all 3 of them, that the enemy's card will go to 0 health, but it won't be defeated, it won't go to the discard pile. So let's implement that. In our for loop, after we've dealt damage to the card, let's check if the card's health equals 0. And then before our for loop, I'm going to create a new variable called cards to destroy, and this is going to be an array, so I'm going to assign it equal to open and close square brackets. And then if a card's health reaches 0, we're going to append that card into the cards to destroy array. Then after that for loop, we can check if our cards to destroy array has anything in it, and if it does, we'll loop through the cards in that array, and we'll call destroy card, which is a function from our battle manager, and we'll pass in card, and we'll pass in opponent in quotes, which is who the card belongs to. Then we'll use our battle manager reference there we're passing in to get access to the destroy card function. And now that that's done, the next thing we want to do is destroy this card, or the tornado card that we just played, since its ability is finished. So we can copy this line already that we've made and paste it out of this if condition. And now here we want to replace card with the card to destroy. And since we don't have any way to actually access that card from inside this script, we're going to pass it in like we did the battle manager reference. So we'll go to the card manager, and when we're calling trigger ability, we're going to also pass in card being dragged, which is the card that we've just put in the slot. And then in the trigger ability function, we'll take it in up here as card with ability. And now for destroy card, we'll put card with ability, and since it's our card, we'll say player. Keep in mind you might have to adjust that a little bit if you're adding magic cards for the opponent. And now if we test this, you can see every time I throw down the magic card, the enemy card loses health, and when the third one is played, the enemy card goes to the graveyard. And also anytime a magic card is finished with its ability, you can see it's also getting destroyed, so everything is working perfectly. And there's only a couple of small things left to do. I want to add a couple pauses just to wait 1 sec when the card's ability is activating before it goes to the graveyard or the discard pile. And I also want to make it so you can't just end your turn while a card ability is activating, and that you can't just place cards or attack or anything during that time. So we already have this wait function set up in the battle manager, so I'm going to do a wait battle manager reference dot wait, and we're going to wait 1.0 or 1 second, and that await keyword is important to suspend the code on that line so it doesn't run the stuff below before the timer finishes. Then we'll copy and paste this wait line, and we'll paste it after our for loop, and we'll also place one here at the very end. And lastly, we want to disable inputs. So I'm going to go into the battle manager script, and at the bottom I'll create a new function called enable end turn button, and it's going to take in a boolean called is enabled. And in this function I'm going to check if is enabled, so if we're passing in true, then I'll copy these lines above to enable the button. Then I'll add an else statement, so if we pass in false to disable the buttons, and I'll copy these 2 lines up here and paste them in, and I'll set visible equals false and disabled equals true. Then back in our tornado script, up at the top of the trigger ability function, we're going to call that new function we just made, so make sure to use your battle manager reference to access it, and we'll pass in false because we're disabling the button. And at the very end of the script, we'll copy and paste that line, but we'll pass in true to enable it again. And then to disable being able to click the mouse or move cards or place cards, we're going to go to our input manager script, and up at the top we'll create a new variable called inputs disabled, and we'll set it equal to false by default. And then in the raycast at cursor function, if inputs are disabled, we'll just return, so the following code won't run. And then back in the tornado script, up at the top of the function, we'll get our reference to the input manager and set inputs disabled equal to true, and then copy that line, put it at the bottom of the function, and set inputs disabled equal to false. And then of course we can't actually do our input manager reference like this, we have to pass it in the same way we did with the battle manager reference. So we'll go into the card manager, and where we're calling the trigger function, we'll also pass in a reference to our input manager, and then in the tornado script we'll make sure to take that in the function. And now we can use this input manager reference to access our inputs disabled variable. Make sure to replace it at the bottom there too. And that's it. We've added card abilities, and each ability has its own script, and all the logic for that ability is contained to that script. So when you add more abilities in the future, you can make a new script, just make sure it has the same function called trigger ability or trigger, whatever it's called, and then change the functionality within that to do whatever you want. You may also in the future want to add a kind of ability stack like Yu-Gi-Oh! So if multiple abilities or cards happen at the same time, you can sort through them and give different abilities priority. If you found this video helpful, please consider leaving a like to help me with the YouTube algorithm, and for upcoming tutorials and devlogs, subscribe.